You ever struggle to know how to analyze a seller financing deal when you have an opportunity to purchase on owner financing? In this video, I'm going to be looking at a warm lead I have on the table. It's a new lead. I've never really looked at this property before until this video. I'm going to be showing you how I analyze this deal as a potential seller financing deal, not just that I'm going to purchase seller financing, but of course I'm looking to hold this deal and either do a lease option on the back end or a land contract or some form of seller financing. There's a lot that goes into analyzing a deal when that's your exit strategy. And so in this video, it's going to just be a raw breakdown and example of me taking a look at an actual house and showing you exactly how I would analyze this deal to see if it's a good one. So you're not going to want to miss it. Stay tuned. Okay, now here is the house, and by the time that this video is released, more than likely either we've done this deal, we have it under contract, or this fellow has rented the property out. There's that. Now this is all public information, everything we're going to be looking at. I'm looking at the Zillow listing right now. This house is listed for rent at $1,900 a month. It's a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house with about 1,500 square feet. I'm going to click into the photos so that we can get a little bit of a perspective on the condition of the property. Many of you are going to be asking how I came across this lead, and the answer is Zillow for rent ads. We sent out a text message to the property owner of this for rent ad, and he responded back with kind of a skeptical message about, is this real? I'm not sure if this is a scam. So I picked up the phone, I called him to show him that I was real, and lo and behold, he turns out very open to owner financing. So we'll see what happens. Now just looking through these photos, that's a very clean house, but it's an outdated kitchen, no stove, nice looking bedrooms, vinyl windows, looks like vinyl flooring, clean bathroom, somewhat updated. This is a big house for this area. It's going to be something I'm going to be coming back to in this analysis here. Decent looking house, 2-car garage. Big house for the area. People who like this area, I think, are probably stretched to find this much square footage. There's just not many houses like this. Most of these houses in this area are about 1,000 square feet or so, or even less, more like 800, 850. A lot of them are 2-bedroom houses. Now, he's listing it for $1,900 a month. I'm very curious, first off, to see what this house is estimated to rent for from Zillow or by Zillow. Now, usually, I can search estimate on my page here, and it brings me down to this rent estimate button. But while I'm down here, take a look. He listed it for rent. This is not too many days ago. He listed it at $2,100, and now he's price dropped that rent down to $1,900, which is a pretty big jump down. It's been 4 days on Zillow and 2 applications, 6 contacts. Yeah, this fellow is not a experienced landlord. He might be feeling the pain of having 2 mortgages. In fact, that was something that was discussed on our call. So what I want to find out here is what Zillow says this house would rent for. It says that the rent estimate is a little over $2,000 a month, and there's a range from $1,924 to $2,168. This is going to be very, very important information. I like to get the Zillow rent estimate. Let me go back down to that, because so many property managers and landlords list their rentals on Zillow, and they know what their houses and units are worth. And so typically when they're posting a for rent, they're not like wildly off base. They're pretty accurate. This is not like FSBOs. With FSBOs, you get some crazy inflations of price by these FSBO owners who think their house is worth way more than it is. But with landlords, property managers, typically they're posting their rentals at a fair rental market, and there's a ton of people posting on Zillow for rent ads. Basically, Zillow is a great place to get data on what is a house worth in terms of its rental value. People talk about getting rental comps off the MLS. Guys, how many more rentals get listed? Is it on the MLS or on Zillow? Like, my guess is way more on Zillow than on the MLS. Most property owners are not going through brokerages and licensed real estate agents to list a rental for rent. They're going through a property manager. They're doing it themselves. So if you're trying to understand what is the rental value for a house, house. Zillow is, in my opinion, the best place to go. It's usually the only place you need to go. Once I get this rental estimate from Zillow, what I'm going to do is then fact check it against current for rents for rental ads for the same bed bath count, or at least the same bedroom count, and see if the Z estimate on the rent is corroborated. So what I can do is click on the filter. Let's see what 4-bedroom plus houses are renting for in this area. Now, right now there's just one, and it's the one we're looking at. If I remove the boundary, I'm going to look a little bit eastward, a little bit westward. If I go westward, 3,900. Now that's a much bigger house. Here's 3,300, a much bigger house. Again, let me come eastward. Okay, there's a 4-bed, 1-bath. Ours is a 4-2, listed at 1,800. Up on this one, this is 1,950 for a 4-1, a little bit lesser square footage. There really aren't that many. There just really aren't that many houses with that many bedrooms available for rent in this area. Here's 2 more for 2,400. They're both 4-1s and slightly smaller. If I click into this one, what's the condition of these houses? You can kind of start to dig into the weeds. Like, this kitchen looks pretty nice on that one. It's a smaller house, only 1 bathroom, nicer condition. They're asking about 2,000 for rents. This one here, they're asking 2,400 for a 5-2. Again, slightly smaller square footage. Very nice photos. Pretty updated. Here's one over here. Basically kind of the same area if you know St. Louis. Here's 1,900. It's also a 4-2. Larger square footage. Looks like a 2-story house with a basement. Cute house, cute brick house. Small kitchen. Somewhat updated, but not fully in the kitchen. Basically, I think that the Z estimate is good. For a house with 1,500 square feet, I think this range seems pretty solid. I mean, I know that for sure I'm not getting way less than that. I mean, there just isn't anything less than that on this page I'm looking at. Besides, here's one for 1,600. And I wonder why they're listing this one so low. Look at this, 2 days on Zillow, 12 contacts. You know that this one's gonna go super, super fast. They listed it too low. This one is undervalued in terms of what they're asking for rent price, because look at this, 2 days, 12 contacts. These metrics right here, guys, are gold. When you're trying to figure out a market, like, can I sell this on seller financing? Can I get a land contract on this? Can I do a lease option? Get to know what areas are hot, what price points are hot. This is a hot rental. Looks nice. Chances are they're going to end up boosting this price up. They're going to realize that they listed it below fair market rents. Now, the reason that I spent so much time looking at these for rent comp results is because it's going to really factor into where I need to be with my end buyer when I do the analysis, and then coming back to my offer, what's the most that I can afford to pay this guy per month on a seller finance type deal. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open up my sub-2 deal evaluator, and I've made some improvements, which I'm really excited about. This fellow does actually have a loan on the property, which complicates it a little bit, because we would have to wrap his FHA loan and a new loan to him. There's a couple ways that I can run the numbers. This would be called like a hybrid deal. And the way that I'm going to do this particular analysis, I'm not going to take into account that underlying debt, because the underlying debt's going to get paid. It's just going to get paid. We don't have to go into the details of how we would do that, but I'm going to actually use the seller financing function on this, because we're not just going to take it sub-2. We're actually going to pay him a monthly payment above his 3.5 loan. We're going to see how much interest we can pay him to entice him to do the deal. He mentioned he liked to cash flow a little bit off of this each month. I'm going to select seller financing. This is a seller financing deal. We're not going to worry about that sub-2 loan, because once we pay him, that loan is going to get paid out of his monthly portion of our payment to him. First things first, in my deal evaluator, I'm going to self-fund this one. I'm going to plan to self-fund it. However, I'm probably going to pull a private money lender in, and I can always go back and reevaluate it as borrowing money or even doing an equity partner, because I have an option to run this analysis with an equity partner as well. But the simplest way to do it, to see if the numbers are good, is just self-funding. We need to input the property value, the after repair value of this house. I'm not going to spend a ton of time running comps on this property, but what I am going to do is come over to realtor.com, and this is how I like to get a general idea of the home's value. I like to first go to realtor.com. I'm going to tell you why I go to realtor.com. Their estimated value is $223, but don't just look at this estimated value. Scroll down to the real estimate, because what you get with realtor.com is actually 3 different data providers and data analytics. There's collateral analytics, there's CoreLogic, and Quantarium. And all 3 data providers have a different estimate for the house's value. Now, what I like to do is not look at the most very recent, but kind of go back a little bit in time, because there has been like a history of them listing it for rent. And maybe if this was a FSBO or on-market property, that's going to bias where basically the valuation, the estimated valuation of these data providers. So I always like to go a little bit like 3 or 4 months back. Does that make sense? Because that's an unbiased interpretation of the estimated value of the house. So like going to the beginning of 2025, the numbers I'm looking at the page here are $241,000 by Collateral Analytics, $252,000 by CoreLogic, and Quantarium at $238,000. Each of those have fluctuated recently, and what's crazy is that CoreLogic dropped down to 155. Like, that seems like an aberration, because if you look at the history of this home's value, there's nothing approaching that low. So I think that's almost certainly an aberration. I'll want to do stage 2 level due diligence, obviously, before I close on this property and make sure that there's nothing going on here funky. But a thumbnail sketch tells me this house is worth probably around that 230 to 250 range. Now, is that ARV or is that fair market value? Difficult question. I think you basically maybe interpret the highest points here as an ARV and then the lower points as like more of a fair market type value, because the house, as we saw, does need some repairs. Fair market value wise, you're probably putting this thing in the lower 200s just based off of these 3 analytics, and then ARV might be closer to that 250, maybe even higher range. This is just a quick thumbnail sketch because I don't want to spend a ton of time on this lead analyzing it until I know it's a deal. Once we're at the contracting stage, then I'm doing comps. I'm actually looking at comps. But for now, I'm trying to get a general idea. So I'm going to go back to Zillow. And when I go to Zillow, it's not going to give me a Z estimate, because when it's listed for rent, if a house is listed for rent, that Z estimate of the home's value goes away as far as I'm aware. But what I can do is go to PropStream and get another estimated value real quickly. So I'm going to go here, type in the address, and it gives me an estimated value of $254,000. Now I have 4 data points. If this were not a for rent ad on Zillow, then I could go to Zillow and get a 5th data point just to quickly understand the value of the house. Does that make sense? Again, this is just stage 1 due diligence, not even stage 2. So that's good enough for me. I'm going to go back to my deal evaluator and put in a 250, maybe a 255 ARV. And now what is the fair market value? That's pretty difficult to know, but the house is cosmetically outdated. So I'm going to just take the ARV and subtract like a light rehab, maybe 20 grand, redo the kitchen. And then now this thing might be worth 255. And so maybe the fair market value might be about 235. That might be off. It probably is off one way or the other, but that's good enough for a first glance and a first analysis. Now, as my mind is thinking this through, I want to see if this house has a basement, because houses that don't have basements are actually totally comped differently than those that do have basements in my neck of the woods. And he doesn't have any basement photos on his rental ad, but PropStream will often tell me if it has a basement or not, and accurately. And unfortunately, this house does not have a basement. Now, that's actually a pretty big deal to me, to the point that my conversation with the seller, looking back on it, we're going to definitely have to get better terms than kind of what I was throwing out to him initially, because that is a massive deal. I'm not going to call it a deal breaker, but game changer. We'll call it a game changer. That might actually affect the ARV and the fair market value. For now, I'm going to just leave it as is, but I'll tell you this, it's going to be harder to find a buyer for this house because it doesn't have a basement. Now I need a better deal than at first I was originally thinking. Bit of a bummer on that, but there you have it. So what's our down payment or cash to seller going to be? I had mentioned 5% on the call. So let's just roll with that for now. So I'm going to take my calculator and let's just say I'm buying this thing at $235. What's 5% at $235? That's $11,750. Now, there's no wholesale fee, there's no realtor commission. Closing costs will be minimal. Let's just put $1,500 in there. Insurance premium. What I'll probably do is take my insured amount, about $235, times 0.0075, probably around $1,700 or $1,800 a month. I'll go ahead and put, I think, $1,700, bit closer on that. Repairs, probably very minimal. The house looked very clean, but there's always something. So I'll put $1,000, and no private money lending costs, no private money lending costs on the back end, other back end expenses, nothing that I can think of at the moment. Now, taxes, insurance, I'm going to put that insurance number of $1,700 there. This is going to spit out an estimated monthly escrow. No PMI, no HOA, but let's go grab a tax number. To do that, I can use PropStream. Level 2 due diligence will definitely be checking county tax records, but let's go ahead and take the PropStream number, come back to the calculator, put that in. Now I have a calculated estimated monthly escrow of about $422, which I'll have to factor in to my payment to the seller. So let's go down to seller financing loan. Now the purchase price, let's just call it the fair market value because it's seller financing. He's willing to finance, so I'll just pay him fair market value. Doesn't have a basement, so I'm not going to go any higher than that. We got our down payment autofills in right here. So the loan amount that we'd be asking him to finance is $223,250. I have it set at 5% interest. Let's just see what happens if he gets 5% interest. That's like my tops when I'm buying with seller financing. It usually doesn't make sense to offer any more than that. You got to run numbers on a deal by deal basis. But again, typically I'm starting less on interest or no interest. Ideally, if you can score those deals, those are obviously pretty fantastic deals at 0% interest, but we'll see what happens at 5% interest. The origination date of the loan, let's just put August, and then we'll amortize it 30 years. Now that doesn't mean that he's willing to go 30 years, but he hadn't talked about doing a shorter term. So I'm just going to assume that he's cool with 30 years until it comes up. And then if he wants a shorter term or a balloon, then I can use that as a point to negotiate down one of the other terms, right? Either price, down payment, or interest rate typically. Now, as it stands, my total monthly payment is $1,621. This is why I was looking at those rental comps, because if this thing's going to rent for about $2,000, I still have a cash flow spread of about $400 a month, which is my minimum threshold. There's some other analytics at the bottom of this page, like our equity. Actually, that number, I'm going to have to adjust that cell. That's wrong. We don't have that much equity. So our holding costs for 4 months of mortgage payments right down here, and our total front end cash requirement is $22,500. So that would be, to get this whole deal done, we would need to go find $22,500, or I'm going to self-fund it if I have the funds available. That's if it takes me 4 months to find my buyer and totally complete the transaction. So these are all of the assumptions of the deal on the front end, on the acquisition. So then on the disposition, on the creative financing exit of this deal, what we're going to do more than likely is mark the price of the house up. So I have a standard 5% markup, but sometimes in a really hot area, really hot property, we might go higher than that, about 10% sometimes. But because it's a slab, honestly, I'm going to leave it at 5% markup, and with a down payment of, let's shoot for 10%. Let's see what happens if I can get 10% down payment from my buyer. Their first payment date to me will be in the future, 30-year amortization, and now what interest rate are my buyers going to pay me? Usually when you're offering to sell on seller financing, what the industry standard is like around 10%. That's pretty typical because bank loans, you're going to get a much better deal, but we are not doing qualified loans. We are obviously compliant with all the lending laws, but these are not qualified loans, and so our buyers are paying a higher percentage on the interest rate, which they can refinance out at any time once they are able to qualify for a different loan. Here I have 9.5 just as the default. At a 9.5 interest rate with these terms, 10% down, and that sales price, their monthly payment is $22.90, which is pretty close to the rental estimate. It's about $300, maybe $250 above what the rents would be. And to me, that's a significant point because I need to have confidence that I'm going to find somebody willing to pay a mortgage of about $2,300. And the way that I like to gauge that is, well, what are people willing to pay in rent? Because if they're willing to pay a little bit more to own, where they get to own the property, make improvements, not be bothered by a landlord, deduct their property taxes, their mortgage interest that they pay, and then have a house that is going to be worth a lot more in the future. If they're willing to pay rents for just like $250 less than that mortgage payment, chances are I'm going to be able to find a buyer. I don't like to go any more than $500 over what the rent rents are for that house. I think that's probably most I would push it, and that's being aggressive. Ideally, their PITI is at that rent range, that average rent range, or below. But in my experience, it's just hard to find those kinds of deals. It's a lot more common where you have this scenario where when you run the numbers, it's like you're going to have to charge a little bit more than what the rents are. But when you think about the value of what you're offering, this really golden opportunity that rarely exists for homeowners, they can afford to pay this interest for a period of time until they get their credit, their documents together, and then can refinance into a different loan. You are doing an amazing thing by providing financing and willing to finance. You're actually willing to carry back the financing on either a land contract or a wraparound if you choose to wrap it, but this one would be tricky. Probably do a land contract or a lease option for a period of time until my buyer's ready to go do a land contract and has that full 10% down payment. But even then, you've offered a great opportunity for them to effectively lock in home ownership. Don't beat yourself up for charging a high interest on these deals or getting above average rents on a lease option. It's such an amazing value that it's worth a lot. People are willing to pay it, and you should get paid for offering that because it is rare and there's a lot of demand. All right, I'll get off my hobby horse about that. So does this deal work? Because we are cash flowing $668 a month at these numbers, and we actually make a front end profit of just over $2,000, which means our cash on cash return is an infinite return. This is amazing. These are the best kinds of deals when you don't have to have private money or an equity partner in the deal long term. You can maybe just borrow the cash required to do the deal, the $22,000 and some change, get your buyer's down payment, and then pay your private money lender back, and then you have 100% of the deal. Right? These are the best kinds of deals. Let me just point out a couple other things. Guys, I've been neglecting the notes section on my deal evaluator that I put over here. Like, so for example, I have some notes where you could put the rent estimate in right here, this yellow box. I think that rent estimate was 2048 or 2046. And so that gives us a rent to PITI delta of 244. That's what I'm talking. I don't like to go more than 500 on the delta, on the difference between my buyer's payment to me and what the average rents are in the neighborhood for that kind of a house. Okay, so I'm within that range very comfortably. I like this deal. So as it stands, this is a good deal. The question now becomes about the stupid slab situation. I really don't like slabs. It's going to be hard to find somebody who loves this house, wants to be in it forever because it's a slab. I could probably find somebody, but it's honestly just not my favorite, and I kind of have to make a decision on whether I'm even willing to buy this kind of house, right? Do I even want to deal with a slab? I've had slabs in the past, a few of them, not a ton, but the ones that I have had, there's just fewer buyers for them. In a situation like this, I think realistically, I need to be more conservative on my numbers. What if I have to do a lease option and I can only get $12,000 down roughly? And what if my monthly payment has to be on the lower end, closer to, let's just adjust that interest rate down, closer to just $2,000, the average rental rate. Okay, we're not charging any more above what this slab 4-bed 2-bath would rent for at about $2,000. That would turn out to be like a 7.5 interest rate, somewhere around there. But you can look at these numbers as like a lease option as well. With a lease option, you're not charging an interest rate. I'm just tweaking the interest rate to adjust my tenant buyer's monthly payment down here. I didn't want to build a whole separate tab to have lease options because you could use this creative finance exit for lease options. You just have to manipulate the interest rate to change your rent amount on a lease option, which would be right here. And let's just assume we did a lease option. We got 5% down. We're only getting about $2,061 in rent payments. So that would mean that we are $10,000 in the deal. So our front end profit, well, there is no profit. This should really say front end profit or loss. I'm just going to change that right now. I actually tweak this deal evaluator on a regular basis. And when I do and make a significant improvement, I upload it to the website. So if you've purchased it, you'll always have the most recent version. Okay. And I think I'm on version 9.0 right now. We are actually slightly negative, which is fine because the cash on cash return is still a whopping 52% cash on cash return. However, at these numbers, I'm only cash flowing $440 a month. I have a threshold of $400. It has to cash flow. Any deal I do has to have potential cash flow of at least $400. At these numbers, numbers, even a somewhat conservative approach, they seem to work. If I was forced into this scenario, this is a big house. That's a lot of square footage. A lot of people have $12,000, $13,000 sitting around. A lot fewer have $20,000, $25,000 sitting around. And if they do, they are looking for more or less like a dream home or like an ideal home. Most people want basements. So I am left with a decision. One other thing I like to do is come to this final tab, this Creative Finance Profit tab, and just take a look at the total profitability on the deal. Let's assume that I do a lease option and it goes for 10 years. Now, maybe they convert to seller finance or land contracts, but let's just say the numbers stay the same. Like I'm not going to charge them any more per month. So this is the total profitability on the deal. I'm always going to be negative on the front end because that's the front end. You only do the front end one time, but every single month I cash flow the same amount, $440. That doesn't change because of my exit strategy. This is not a long-term rental. They're paying for everything. My cash flow is the cash flow, right? But then on the back end profit, this is if my tenant buyer were to ever sell the property. I have this little tiny spread between what they owe me and then what I owe the lender slash seller on this property. And as you can see, cash flow goes up every single month and my back end spread does as well because my amortization is going to be further ahead than my buyer's amortization. So that's why that spread continues to go up in time. And what I like to do is take a look at that 10-year mark, 120 months, and just see how much I can make on this deal. $65,000, that's where we're at after 10 years if this deal goes 10 years and everything goes smoothly. So the question for me and for you, if this is your deal that you're looking at, is this deal worth $65,000 after 10 years? Is all the effort that I'm going to have to put forth to negotiate, go walk the house, go get the contracts, close the deal, get the funding or the gap funding, and then go get out yard signs, go put out Zillow ads, go find a buyer, do all the paperwork for the buyer, close with the buyer, manage the payment collection, whether it's a lease option I'm managing myself, or if I put them with note servicing, if it's like a land contract or something, I could do that. But there's still a potential that this house comes back to me. I have to do loss mitigation. And do I want this house back? Is this a house that's going to be worth more in 5 years if I happen to get it back? And then I could go out and sell it to be made whole if I have a non-paying or a slow-paying person that I need to get out of there. Those are all the questions now at this point I am asking myself. And to me, $65,000 is not enough. It is not enough to do this deal. I feel like that's not enough reward for the risk that I'm taking in buying a slab property. That's how big of a deal slab versus full basement, or at least partial basement, or some basement that people can go down and put storage and make a little rec room down there is kind of a big deal in my market. So how can I make that number better, that $65,000 number better? The only way that I can make that better is to change my front end creative finance purchasing terms, because I'm just going to roll with this conservative estimate on what I can do on my exit strategy. I'm not going to change it. I'm going to go conservative on this one because of the slab situation, and it's not an updated house. It's clean, but it's not updated. How can I make this a better deal? Well, essentially, the two parameters I could push here, really three, are price, down payment, and interest rate. Now, I feel like 5% down is reasonable. I don't really want to touch that in terms of my down payment to my seller, although I'm not afraid to. Maybe I will. Let's just see what happens if I offer him 4%. Now, he's got a 3.5 FHA, so he'll probably not make anything. Look at how my total profitability goes up 20 grand in the course of 10 years, up to 87,000. Ideally, I want to be at 100 grand. You know it's a good deal, at least at first glance, if at 10 years you stand to make 100 grand on the entire deal. That's what I like to see, 100 grand. Now, you might be a little bit less. I might make exceptions sometimes, but that's a good benchmark in my opinion. What if we adjusted the purchase price down to 220 because it's a slab? And I wouldn't be surprised if that was closer to the actual fair market value. So I'm going to adjust it up here as well. ARV doesn't factor into any of the formulas on the calculator. I'll just leave that there. Don't really have to adjust it. But 220 sales price. And now I come over here to my total profit tab. This didn't really move the needle, actually. It's interesting because I'm not selling it for any more. I'd have to bump this up to like 10% here, selling it to my buyer or doing a lease option for that amount. And now I'm at 100 grand. Look at that. So if I I can sell the house for $242,000, which is quite within the realm of possibility. But do I want to bet on that? Probably not. But it's certainly possible that I could make $100,000 off of this deal. I prefer probably just to leave this at 5% and just play it conservative. So if I can pay $220,000 to him at 4%, then really I'm standing to make about $80,000 on the deal over 10 years. The only way that we could get that to $100,000 is to continue to lower that sales price, which I just don't think is going to happen, or the interest rate, which again, it's not going to work with his underlying debt. See, I'm there at $100,000, but he's got a 3.5 FHA loan on it, so I can't go down that low. We're going to see what I'm going to do, probably see if we can kind of find some happy middle ground is what I'm going to do. See if I can get a lower sales price, and then if I can sell it, because if I can get a lower sales price, explaining to him the whole slab situation, and then if I can sell it at a higher price, then I can create a bigger principal spread on the two numbers. What I want to do is actually see what he bought it for. Looks like he bought it for $130,000 in 2016. A lot of time has passed since 2016. That's almost 10 years. It's definitely not without the realm of possibility that this house is now closer to $100,000, but it's certainly not a guarantee that this house is worth $255,000. No, it's probably not. I'm going to have to dig into some comps. So I have a little bit of more homework that I would do, I think. So to summarize, I did as much of an analysis on the front end, just an initial look that I could possibly do. I ran into an issue with a unique characteristic of the property, namely it being a slab and not having a full basement, which now makes me question the actual value of the property, because that's a big disparity between slabs and basement possessing properties in my market. So next thing I'll do is I'll probably just go run some quick comps. It's not going to take that long. I do have MLS access. I'm not going to put you through the pains of running comps. That's going to be a whole different video. But guys, that's it. So is this a deal or is this not a deal? In my opinion, it could be a deal. It's going to really depend on what I see slabs doing in this neighborhood. Okay, so maybe I'll do a follow-up video to this. Maybe I won't. But I hope that was helpful to you in seeing how you can so quickly analyze these deals if you just know where to look and how to organize your information. You can quickly formulate your cash flow spread, your equity spread, your total profitability over the course of time, and then you're able to make an offer, right? You kind of know how to take the conversation from warm lead to like, I'm interested, how much of a down payment can you bring, blah, 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 to, hey, Mr. Seller, took a look at the property, I crunched the numbers, here's what I can do. At that point, it's time to negotiate, it's time to get a contract if the other party is willing to do business, and then you might have a deal, all right? And then you're off to the races making cash flow. This is why I love real estate, because it's so creative. It's really up to you to make these deals happen. The only limits are you, your imagination, your creativity, your willingness to put in the time, the effort, and to actually do it, to actually take action, because fortune does favor the bold, and it's those of us who are out there making offers, actually buying properties that are making the massive passive income from these deals that we're all looking for. I hope that was helpful. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, leave a comment below, tell me what you think. You can find my podcast, Sub 2 Investor Podcast, on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. I have been slowly catching up all of my content. Eventually I'll be brought current, but it's going to be all there available for you to listen while on your drive to work or during a workout or while you're falling asleep, whatever. Thanks so much for your time and for watching. Until next time, stay creative. Peace. Thanks for watching, everybody.